Welcome to the Michigan Experience, where we highlight Michigan's contemporary and historical contributions. I'm your host, Michael J. Thorpe. It's the responsibility of every community to remember, honor, and capture the stories of our Michigan veterans. With this project, communities can have a better sense of the veterans among them, and even discover the heroes that they never knew. On this episode, Vietnam Veterans, we share the stories of Michigan veterans who served during the Vietnam War, a conflict that not only was highly unpopular, but also divided the nation. One of the goals of the Michigan Experience is to share the stories of those from our state who have taken part in the history of our country. We think it's important to understand the past to better prepare for the future.
Well, I think, in particular, there's a group of veterans who never really got a welcome home. There's a lot of folks who served in Vietnam that just never got the proper thank you. And in fact, in some ways, they were treated kind of poorly when they came back because this country was so divided about that war. Now, that happens in other conflicts for sure. And we've seen that, and even some of our soldiers and sailors who come back in recent conflicts. But it's nothing quite like what happened to the Vietnam veteran. Those folks who served in Vietnam served with honor and dignity, put themselves at risk, saw many of their comrades in arms fall, over 55,000, 57,000, something like that. Never came home at all. And then the ones who came home, they really didn't get the parade. They didn't get the thank you. They didn't get that welcome. And there's a lot of them that are still around. And so I think we have kind of a unique and special obligation to that group of veterans, while we still can, to make sure to say thank you to them.
Staff Sergeant Glenn Ream was an aircraft refueler who was badly burned in an accident involving jet fuel catching fire. He recalls the tough transition he went through going back to civilian life, and now he's dedicated himself to helping older veterans find peace with the moving wall and helping younger veterans and the community understand the life-changing effects being in a conflict can have when you return home.
I've made it my mission to help our younger generation of veterans now so that they don't have to go through the things that we went through. We're getting some improvements, but it's an ongoing battle, and it's unfortunate to still see people who do not respect our veterans, even the ones today. And people do not realize what a change in life you go through when you go into the military, and especially if you go into a hostile environment. Everything changes. People don't understand that when you're in a war zone, the other guy wants to see you gone too. And you have to live on a survival mode. In other words, if the bad guy's out there and he's thinking about doing something, you need to react now and save yourself. And so many things happen to where people have experienced being in a battle and they just can't understand why they weren't killed too. And they live with this I've done what's called the moving wall. It's a replica of the one in DC. And I see these guys come up and they're shaking, they're nervous, they're trying to go to where their buddies are on the panel on the wall. There's a lot of talking to people. And so it's a process, and if you just stand and watch reactions of people and the veterans that are trying to, make that last ditch thing of still trying to understand why I'm here and you guys aren't. And you never totally ever get rid of it, but maybe you can find a little bit of peace in your own mind and just, give your last goodbye to your brothers.
Anna Wolfe Owens felt that if there was any way that she could help during the Vietnam conflict, she would. So she enlisted in the U.S. Army. She was stationed in Germany during the war and was part of that first wave of women soldiers involved during that time. While she believed in the country and was willing to put on the uniform and give the ultimate sacrifice if necessary, her feelings were quite different from those of the people in her hometown.
The community I grew up in was not poor in comparison to some places, but a poor African American community. Therefore, almost every young African American man expected to be drafted and sent to Vietnam. Not once did anyone expect that if they were drafted, that they could have an engineering job on, stateside or anything like that, because there were so many African Americans dying in this conflict. And they knew it. They did not expect to do anything but be sent to Vietnam. And because it was a more poor neighborhood, they couldn't run away to Canada the way some people did. Rich people sent their kids away to college and, various things like that, so they didn't have to go. But when you're poor, you knew you were going to be sent to die. My feeling was, we're there, and if there was some way that I could help, I would be there. I had one friend, I remember the day that he was drafted, or he found that he was being drafted. And the way he found out was that they printed the birth dates of the people in the newspaper, the local newspaper in my hometown, the ones that were going to be sent to the military. And that's how he found he was being sent. He read his birthday. If you can imagine how frightening that might have been. And with all the things that were happening in Vietnam, he went to Vietnam at 18. When he returned at 22, his hair was already gray. That's the amount of stress that people were dealing with.
Phil Weis experienced a tragedy when the C-5A aircraft that he was on during Operation Baby Lift crashed in a field. The plane was carrying hundreds of babies, children, and adults. He was the sole survivor of that crash that killed over 200 people. The events haunted him for many years, but he finally was able to talk about his experiences in the United States Air Force and share the events that changed his life in his book, Fragile Delivery.
It's about me growing up in Flint, Michigan, and talking about the fears of having to go to war, knowing that each year thousands of veterans, thousands of soldiers were dying, and I knew that when it was my turn to go, I had a decision to make. Should I go in the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines? So I decided to go in the Air Force. And when I did my thing in the Air Force, I come across this situation called Operation Baby Lift. And Operation Baby Lift was about these fragile little kids and babies that was caught up in this war that was no fault of their own. And my part in these babies during the fall of Saigon was to get them out of Vietnam and for them to be caught up in another tragedy such as an airplane crash. I felt there was something, a story that needed to be told through my vision, through my eyes, from what I saw. And sharing the story with these babies surviving the airplane crash and these babies growing into adult life and being adopted all over the world. And Fragile Delivery allows me to reconnect with some of these kids that I helped airlift, and I was able to reconnect with them after they become adults, and sharing what I went through and how I care for them in their youngest days of life. And I thought this Fragile Delivery would capture my life story as it pertains to Operation Baby Lift.
Les Snyder's career in the United States Air Force was a long and distinguished one. He started out as a mechanic and eventually became a pilot. He served and was stationed at Air Force bases all over the world, but Vietnam was his first deployment. And he recalls not only what it was like to be in a shooting war, but also what it was like to experience a brand new environment in Vietnam.
Nervous. It was hot. Didn't know what to expect. You know, the guys over there were pretty laid back. They were dedicated. They knew what they were doing. But it's not like later once I got into, like when I left there and came back to Michigan to Cache Sawyer, that was a SAC base. That is the Air Force. They got rules on rules. So it was quite a bit of a change. It was a real interesting time, you know, because during the shooting war, which was in January, we were told by our military intel on our first flight out during the shooting war that 50% of the airplanes and crews were not going to make it back. That gives you a very abrupt wake-up call, because you don't know what to expect. You know, you're going to take off. You're flying a cargo airplane. It's low. It's slow. It's not like a fighter. You can't outrun the darn thing with that airplane. So you're just a big target. And you take off. You got that in the back of your mind that you may not make it back. Luckily, we did. A few airplanes did have some extra bullet holes and such in them, but nothing drastic. We didn't lose anyone. So we were all thankful for that.
To join the Army during Vietnam, all one needed was a birth certificate or a baptism certificate. However, you still had to be 18. But age didn't stop Haskell Walker, who was only 15 years old, from joining and fulfilling a boyhood dream of becoming a soldier so he could help to support his family in a time of need. Here's his story about how he made that happen and in the process did a wonderful thing for his mother.
My father passed away when I was 11 years old, and my mother was raising 6 of us by herself. And even though I had an older brother, 2 older sisters, no one was doing anything to try to help. So school no longer held my interest. I was interested in doing something, making some money. But I always knew, actually since I was about 2 years old, that I wanted to be a soldier. But one morning, she fussed at me for trying to play sick, even though I was just tired from sitting up all night looking for Army movies. So I made the decision that I need to do something. So I called the Army recruiter, and he said he would pick me up the next day. When my mother came home, I told her that I was going to join the Army. And she looked at me and said, "Boy, you can't join the Army. You only 15 years old." And I told her, I said, "Ma," I said, "all I need is a birth certificate or a baptism certificate." Well, my mom was a minister. And even though she didn't do it herself, she talked to the pastor of the church. And the pastor made me up a baptism certificate, putting my age up. I remember him coming out looking at me saying, "Once you get in there, you can't get out." And I'm like, "Yes, sir, I know." But I must have took that seriously, because it took me 26 years to decide to come on out of there. But one of the things that I told my mother, I said, "Mom, if you help me get in," I said, "I will finish school and send some money home to help you out." So that's what I did. But when that first Christmas came away from home, that was kind of rough, being away from family, that first year. So my first year in the service, I kind of slacked off a little bit. But the next year I came home on leave, and I was talking about some of the things I did and some of the places that I've gone. I even, had got my high school diploma like I promised my mom. And one of the things that, hit me is when I was showing her my high school diploma, she was showing me something that came from the school board saying I was still in the 9th grade. And I was like, "No, I'm not. I got my high school diploma." But on that leave home, there was something that she had said to me that kind of caught my ear. And I looked at her and I said, "Mom," I said, "you didn't finish high school?" And she said, "No." I said, "Mom, I thought you had college." And she was like, "No, I had y'all." So that kind of bothered me for a second. But then after talking to her, I looked at her, I said, "You know what, Mom?" I said, "I got my GI Bill." I said, they give me enough money for, me to go to school and everything. I said, "I could use some of that money to send you back to school." So I told my mother, I said, "Mom, if you want to go back to school," I said, "I will pay for you to go back to school." And the thing was, with the help of the GI Bill, my mother went back to school when she was 42 years old and got her GED. By the time my mother was 54, my mother had a PhD. This woman went back to school and she went crazy with it, and I paid for her to go back to school. So that's the idea that, it's never too late to do anything if you had a mind to do it. But, the GI Bill was able to help me pay for my schooling and my mother's schooling. So that was a plus.
Chris Alison's love of music went with him when he was sent to Vietnam. Playing his guitar provided him with a sense of peace in a hostile situation, so he played as often as he could. He discovered a common appreciation for music among his fellow troops and has continued to make music with veterans who also play. However, while he was in Da Nang, his love of music was one of the only things that kept him going during that time in Vietnam.
In Vietnam, if you were, one of the first things you learned when you got there was you can buy cheap stereo equipment through Paysex catalog, which was in Japan. You could order it and then have it sent home. And everybody, 4-channel stereos were just coming out then, and man, you could get these things for next to nothing. But, some people would order them and have them delivered to the base. And you'd go in somebody's, hooch there that was, about as big as this area here, and, half of it was filled with stereo equipment. But the only two, you go to the BX over there, the only two pieces of music you could buy, album or tape, they had real tapes, were the Carpenters and Jesus Christ Superstar. Those are the only two things they ever had the whole time I was there. So now, I liked the Carpenters, I'll say that with quotes, but it wasn't really my type of music. But I learned Jesus Christ Superstar note for note. When I came back from Vietnam, I could play the entire album note for note, and I knew everything. I almost directed it here 2 years ago, but still one of my favorite pieces of all time. But and I'm sure that got a lot of us through over there because that was all that was available. So I'm just glad it wasn't like, you know, the Carpenters and the Archies or something, you know. At least there was some really good music to listen to. And I did a lot of writing over there, you know. It's because after you got, you know, all you could out of those two pieces that you could buy, then you wrote your own. So a lot of them didn't survive. I don't know what happened to them. We'd sit around and everybody kind of throw in a verse here and there. But it was, yeah, that music got, I know for me, it got me through a lot of rough nights. I've been playing music now for 51 years, so you meet a lot of people, and when you meet somebody that plays and you have a connection with, it makes it that much more of a total experience. So I guess my long, short-winded answer would be there's a connection there as a veteran to begin with. When you play music with a veteran, there's another connection. So, you know, you're ahead of the ball game right away. And it doesn't matter the genre. A lot of vets I know play country music, you know, and that's great. You know, a lot of vets I know play the stuff, you know, coffee house music. A lot of vets get into, you know, heavy metal music, you know, whatever makes them tick. But I think the big thing for me is just the connection between or the combined connection, being a veteran, that, you know, you've got those experiences to share, and the music. And like I said, I'm going into my 6th decade of it, so there's a lot to share when you get a hold of somebody, especially, you know, if they've been where you've been. You know, was it last year? I met two guys out at Arts Beats and Eats in Detroit. We went down there for the day and ran across two guys that I'm friends with now on Facebook that were musicians, but I had my vet hat on, and, you know, they asked where I was. First thing they did, of course, they were there when I was there.
Thanks for joining us on this edition of The Michigan Experience. The Vietnam War left our Michigan veterans with memories that they have carried mostly to themselves for over 50 years. We hope that this program will help in the healing process for those brave men and women of our military. For more information and to view complete profiles of the veterans featured on this program, go to peacefulwarriorsproject.com. Until next time, I'm Michael J. Thorpe.